Time now for our Talking Point segment with Charlie Kirk, founder of Turning Point USA. Charlie, I'm old enough to remember when the Soviet Union still existed and people like Ted Kennedy, Democrats, were sneaking over to the Soviet Union to do diplomacy behind the back of President Reagan. I remember when all of this kind of crazy stuff, Bernie Sanders went and honeymooned in the Soviet Empire at the height of the Cold War. And now, because Donald Trump has the temerity to stand toe-to-toe with Vladimir Putin, the whole world's coming to an end. Talk a little bit about what's going on with diplomacy.
Yeah, and the word they kept on using was traitor and treasonous. How horrific. I don't remember any of those words being used when Barack Obama gave Iran a path to a nuclear weapon and hundreds of millions of dollars in cash on a private jet without telling anyone in the middle of the night going to Tehran. I don't remember the word treason being used when Hillary Clinton sold 20% of our uranium in exchange for cash, which, by the way, Bill Clinton gave a speech in Russia while Hillary was Secretary of State and got $500,000 from a Russia state-owned finance company. Now, I've heard Bill Clinton speak before. He's not worth $500,000 for 20 minutes. That's pure pay to play. And look, the president has been historically rough and tough on Russia, and this is not getting reported in the media, and I wish he would even talk about it more. He's closed down a record number of Russian consulates in America. He's kicked out Russian ambassadors and Russian citizens. He defied Putin's direct wishes and demands twice when executing airstrikes in Syria. In fact, over 200 Russians were killed when these airstrikes happened in Syria. Not that that's a good thing, but that did not happen under Barack Obama. President Trump refuses to recognize the illegal annexation of Crimea. Not to mention, President Trump has slapped on a record number of sanctions against Russia. And finally, he has armed the people of Ukraine with deadly weaponry, and he has stood with the people of Ukraine in their fight for sovereignty against Russian aggression. So you put all that together, all of a sudden you're saying, well, the president is pretty tough and rough on Russia. And I would venture a guess, knowing the president as a patriot and a problem solver, he wanted to have that discussion privately with Putin, not publicly to embarrass him, because war is a terrible, terrible thing. I don't think we want to devolve into that. And President Trump's leadership here has been very commendable, and the media's overreaction has been atrocious.
I'm glad you brought up the word treason. It's amazing. I suppose if there's one silver lining to this controversy, it's the fact that Democrats and social progressives now recognize there is such a thing as treason. You mentioned some examples, but Bo Bergdahl, who actually deserted from his own troops, wandered over to the enemy and sympathized with them, was brought back to America by Barack Obama, paying the mullahs of Iran millions and millions and millions of dollars to bring him back. And he was let off without even a slap on the wrist, didn't spend one day in jail for his desertion. But it's nice to know that the American left now has rediscovered the word treason. You talk about what happened with Trump in Russia. The other thing that bothers me about this, Charlie, is they assume because Donald Trump has a photo op with Putin that Trump isn't smart enough behind the scenes to reserve judgment. The idea that it's the preconceived idea that bothers me, that Trump is so stupid and so inexperienced that he's being played by Putin, when in reality, it seems to me Trump's doing a pretty good job of manipulating Putin for his advantage.
Totally. And look, so the insinuation here and the subtext is that Trump is an idiot or Trump is corrupt, one of two. Can't be both, so it's unusual that they try to put those two together. But these are people that have still not accepted the election results of a duly elected president. And they do not want, if President Trump brokered peace with Russia, they would say, why aren't we at war? If President Trump fired missiles, they said, why don't we have peace? If President Trump did meet with Putin, they would say, what is he afraid of? Why won't he meet with him? Is he bought and paid for by him? And when he meets with him, they say, oh my goodness, he must be bought and paid for. President Trump has to just do what is the correct thing, which he is doing, and not worry about any of the media chatter or potential repercussions from doing the proper and correct thing on the world stage.
Yeah, all the furor in London, too, has overshadowed two important summits, right? What he did with NATO and what he did in England. Let's talk about those two diplomatic embassies and how successful they were. Start with NATO. He basically got NATO countries to commit to spending more money on their national defense, something Barack Obama kind of bandied about but never put any pressure on. Trump has succeeded in doing it.
Over $50 billion, I think, he got for NATO, which is another thing. Putin hates NATO, so he's getting NATO more money. He's funding NATO. Give me a break. He's giving NATO a record amount of funding and support. And this idea that he's somehow a Russian sympathizer or agent just does not stand up to the facts of the matter. And so it's rather comical to me. But kind of going back to how he handled NATO, he handled it terrifically. And by the way, he called out Angela Merkel for having a Russian natural gas pipeline into Germany. He said, hey, we're happy to sell it to you. We're your friends. We got plenty of natural gas. And they're going in the wrong direction. They wrongfully shut down all their nuclear plants a couple of years ago, which has made them now very reliant on Russian energy. And so here's a Germany's part of NATO. They're worried about Russian aggression, yet they're buying energy from Russia to help fund their military buildup. And so, look, the president did wonderful in England. He did wonderful in NATO, and he stood up for American interests, both financially and also strengthened NATO, which is an important alliance. But everyone has to pay up, and they have to participate. And so far, it's been America just footing the bill.
Yeah, I'm really proud of the president for telling the NATO nations, look, we'll partner with you to protect yourselves, but we're not going to protect you exclusively. And you think about the media's disinterest in the fact of what you pointed out. I mean, pretty much all of Western Europe now has become dependent on Russia for much of its energy needs. And yet it's America who has no such ties. We are not dependent on Russian oil or gas in any way, shape, or form. In fact, if our trade with Russia stopped tomorrow, we wouldn't miss a beat. It would absolutely cripple European nations. And yet, who's got the real controversy here? And yet, Trump, not only did he call out the NATO nations for not paying their fair share, he got them to double down on it. And when you think about the reception of Trump in London, let's talk about that. Mayor Khan, the incivility, some of the stupidity, the fact that some of these young, goofy, social progressive the young monarchy refused to meet with Donald Trump. In spite of all of that, in spite of crowds of protesters that were much smaller when we actually saw their pictures than the news reported, the summit in London was a tremendous success.
It was a huge success. And I mean, here's Mayor Khan, who says he supports free speech, and then I must allow them to protest. Meanwhile, Tommy Robinson is rotting in jail. So yeah, that really works out well. But look, the people of Britain and the people of Europe, they can protest, they can complain, they can try to disrupt, but at the baseline of all of this, they understand, and they don't want to admit it, but I think deep down they know it, that America is still the leader of the free world. And it's not up to anyone except America to dictate the direction of Europe and the way that, the geopolitical kind of climate will continue.
I thought it was a wonderful mark of leadership when the president, in a moment of honest sincerity, told Prime Minister May, look, you have got to follow through on the wishes of the British people. Brexit is a reality. It was voted for. And if you can't get the bureaucrats and the bureaucrats of your country and the EU to agree to this separation, maybe you ought to sue them. I thought that was just shockingly frank and really good advice and really inspiring advice that President Trump felt confident enough to stand with the British people in this move.
I totally agree with that. And look, I mean, Britain made a very bold decision to execute Brexit, and there's now bureaucrats and deep state actors that are trying to prevent this from actually happening. And so I stand with the true people of Britain that want to see this happen. And I mean, look, the European Union is a total bureaucratic socialist disaster and mess. Each country should dictate their future in Europe, not Brussels. And I think that has been a growing difficulty and problem. And I very much hope that Britain will fulfill the people's demands when it comes to this.
One of the things that's bothered me for a long time, Charlie, is how entitled the progressive left is to international diplomacy. They believe they're the only ones smart enough. They're the smartest people in the room. They're the only ones that should be allowed to talk to foreign dignitaries. And yet we've seen basically 10 to 12 years of unabated progressive foreign policy. And I can't think of a single accomplishment. The mullahs continue to build nuclear weapons despite all the money we sent them. The Middle East is falling to pieces. I can't think of any success they've had in the international stage. Why in the world would we trust them and the media that abets them in reporting these things accurately?
That's exactly right. And so look, but who I do trust is the president, who has had successful foreign policy decision after successful foreign policy decision. They said, don't do airstrikes in Syria. It's going to start war. That didn't happen. He's abolished ISIS. We're closer to peace ever with North Korea. He moved the embassy to Jerusalem. He canceled the terrible Iranian nuclear deal. And so the benefit of the doubt should go in the direction of the president. He has made the world a safer place. He has made America stronger. He has made our role more clear and decisive and declared in a foreign policy climate where the world is looking for a leader. And I think our greatest foreign adversary is not Russia. It is China. China is the great enemy of the West. They are growing at a rapid pace economically, militarily. They're the world's second biggest military. They're building islands in the South China Sea. They attack us through cyber daily and with very little to no repercussions. They're absolutely killing us on trade, stealing our IP. And if we do nothing to thwart the rise of the Chinese empire, which is really what it is, not to mention the ports of entry, the natural mineral access that they're buying up in sub-Saharan Africa, South America, Central America, and all throughout Southeast Asia, they're trying to create a 100-year plan of the Chinese empire. This is the true threat to the West. They do not have any respect for the individual. Russia pales in comparison to the power of China. Russia is 130 million people. China is 1.2 billion. It's not even close to the same sort of threat. And I think this entire Russia fiasco, if you will, is a distraction. They are not necessarily our friend. They are not our greatest adversary at all. Radical Islamic theocratic fascism and China are the two biggest threats to America.
I think that's absolutely correct. And of course, the media refuses to talk about the fact that despite the dog and pony show yesterday, today Putin has come forth and said he is willing to help the Americans with the North Korean situation, which is a wonderful piece of leverage against what you just said, the fact that the Chinese are very sketchy about what they actually will allow Donald Trump to accomplish in North Korea. So he's playing geopolitical politics on a global level. The American media and leftist politicians are playing it solely for their own political advantage.
Without a doubt. And if we do not recognize the threat of China, of what they will do to the United States and what they will do to our kind of future and kind of how we will exist in the 21st century, my generation is going to have to encounter that. And I mean, if you look at countries that have actually attacked the United States in the last 100 years, I mean, Russia, they put forth some bots and maybe they tried to corrupt some servers here and there. China actually executes true cybersecurity threats against the U.S. China is rapidly building up the U.S. military in defiance of the Pacific Rim. If you want to talk countries that actually attack the United States, how about Saudi Arabia that pulled off 9/11? They financed, planned, and knew about 9/11. Yet for whatever reason, the people that have horribly screwed up our foreign policy over the last 30 years are the same people that are now screaming that we should be more fierce with Russia. These are the people that wanted to go to war with Iraq instead of penalizing Saudi Arabia. These are the people that have made the horrible mistake of the decisions in the Middle East. They're the same people that have created ISIS with the withdrawal of ISIS. We shouldn't have invaded Iraq, but we shouldn't have withdrawn the way we did either. And yet these are the same people that are now acting like experts with the Russian issue. And I think President Trump takes it issue by issue, matter by matter. And look, there's no mistake. I'm not trying to say Russia is an ally, but Russia, we've had a very complicated, at times helpful relationship with them. We partnered with Russia to defeat Nazism in the 1940s. When the Soviet Union fell, we opened up trade with Russia, and we still buy lots of products and goods and services from them, and vice versa. So I think it's a big mistake to try to just immediately think we have to do saber rattling all the time, especially when the great enemies are China and other countries that have wished us harm throughout the last 20 or 30 years.
And let's stop pretending that standing face to face with a foreign dignitary, even one with questionable moral and political values, is in itself a sign of corruption on our side. Here's to draining the diplomatic swamp as well. Charlie Kirk, my friend, it's always a great pleasure talking to you, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
You're doing a great job, seriously. Great job. Thank you.
Thanks, Charlie.